各位观众大家好，我是小田老师，现在正在阳光灿烂的南非开普敦跟你打招呼。我们今天非常荣幸邀请到了南非著名的画廊 Guns&Rain 的主持人Dr.Julie Taylor，Julie Taylor 博士来跟我们分享他的画廊的旅程。那首先我们有请 Dr.Julie Taylor 向大家介绍一下大家。Julie 你好。
你好 Tian， 我是 Julie Taylor. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Julie, would you like to introduce yourself to the Chinese audience and tell us a little bit about Guns&Rain?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for having me, and very excited to get to know your audience and your viewers. So Guns&Rain is a gallery based in Johannesburg. We work with artists from 6 different African countries, and I founded the gallery in 2014. Actually, it was started as an online gallery only in the first instance, and then since 2018 we've had a physical presence in Johannesburg, but we work all around the world and we exhibit our artists' work all around the world. So that's it in a little nutshell, but I know we're going to get into some more details.
Wonderful. 在学习了一些关于非洲艺术的知识之后呢，我们非常有幸可以跟 Julie 来聊一聊非洲艺术市场，因为毕竟她是一个画廊的主理人，对艺术市场有非常直接的了解，所以就想请问问 Julie Taylor， 她认为非洲的艺术市场、非洲的艺术品在国际市场的价值近几年是怎么样的？So Dr. Julie Taylor, we have in recent years seen the African artists and African art, especially contemporary art and contemporary art artists from Africa being very popular on the global market. Why do you think it's time for Africa?
I think a number of things have happened over the last few years to lead to this, and it has definitely been happening over the last 5 to 7 years. But in the last 2 to 3, I think everyone really sees it and feels it. But it's been a wave that has been happening now already for some time. So I think there's a number of different reasons that explain this. One is that there's always a hunger and an appetite for new things in the art world. And I suppose in a way, Africa has been a kind of last frontier in terms of the art market. African artists are using often unusual materials, fresh materials, things that in other parts of the world might be attractive and appealing to collectors who are looking for something different and new. I think there's been a big wave of activity, especially in the UK and Europe, to raise the profile of African contemporary art. Since 2013, 2014, for example, there's been annual art fairs taking place in London, in Paris, and bit by bit, awareness has started to grow around African contemporary art. Perceptions about Africa are changing. I think historically people used to think of African art being something ethnic or traditional or ethnological, and now people are starting to understand that the continent has its own contemporary art practice and that this has been well underway for quite some time. I think obviously the rise of the internet has also helped with awareness about African art, and Guns&Rain Gallery is a good example in that respect. Then of course we had COVID. COVID has also meant that everyone in many different industries has turned increasingly to the internet to communicate, to share, to learn. And so despite the tragedies of COVID, I think there's also some very positive outcomes, which is that there's a lot more awareness and collaboration around African art internationally. I would also mention Black Lives Matter, the movement which began also during COVID and which led to a lot more awareness around the exclusion and marginalization of artists, not only artists, but including artists of color and Black artists, African American artists within the United States, but also internationally. So I think all of these factors have come together over the last few years to create a moment where there is a big hunger and interest in African contemporary art.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting you just mentioned about the new materials. Would you like to give us some examples of the new materials used in Africa and also how the global audience responds to it?
Absolutely. I think it's an interesting question. For example, in Zimbabwe, we've seen over the last number of years very interesting use of found objects and found materials. Now, this comes out of a particular kind of economic context where artists don't often have access to traditional materials like paint or other traditional conventional art materials. But of course, they still have this very strong creative drive. They're informed by a very particular set of historical circumstances in their country. And so what we've seen is that a lot of artists have used recycled waste, found objects, found items, and they have started to transform those into art objects. So now this also kind of ties into, I suppose, international growing concerns around the environment. And what we see is that actually artists are perhaps killing a few birds with one stone, because they are not only commenting on kind of waste and how to transform waste in a productive, creative way, but they're also circumventing the need for very conventional, traditional materials, and they're doing that in very powerful ways. So, for example, one of the artists that we work with, he works with old shoes. He reclaims shoes that have been thrown away, discarded, and he turns them into these extraordinary sculptures. So that's just one example of how African artists are using new and unusual materials.
And what's the reception of the global audience and collectors? Just curious.
Well, often they don't know what the materials are, because when you see the final object, the final sculpture, you don't actually know at first what it is. When you start to look closely, when you start to read about the artist and learn about the artist and hear the artist's stories, then you start to understand what the materials are. And it's a very kind of innovative and dynamic use of these materials. In some cases, they are plastics, discarded plastics. The caps from perfume bottles or deodorant sprays that artists like, for example, Moffat Takadiwa, also a Zimbabwean artist, he is using to transform entirely. When you look at the work at first, you would have no idea what it's made from. As you get closer and you start attending to the detail, then you realize, wow, this is someone who's taken what everyone else perceives as trash and turned it into something of artistic value.
So that will be something the Chinese audience will find out through African journey.
That is highly possible, and I would love to hear what people's impressions are when they start to discover this kind of work. And I should add that this is not the only type of work, of course. This is just one small part of it, but it is an example, I think, where African artists are being particularly innovative and standing out from peers in other part of the world.
接下来我提出来的问题是关于网络时代的非洲艺术交易。Julie Taylor 之前是在世界上非常知名的搜索引擎公司工作，那我想问问他是如何把自己的工作经验还有一些观察带到艺术这个行业中的。So Julie, you just mentioned that Guns&Rain is a product of the internet era. So I'm very curious how, as a gallerist, you work with the internet space, and how do you bring the artists and the artwork to interact with the web space as well?
Thank you for your question. So my background was in tech before I started Guns&Rain, and so I was already passionate about the web and what the web might be able to do for African artists. And back in 2014, there was very little online activity on the continent when it came to fine art. And so I wanted to kind of address that gap in the market, and I wanted to explore that niche because I thought it could be potentially very productive for African artists, not only to raise awareness about themselves and what they were doing, but also to help them sell work to an international audience. So when I founded Guns&Rain in 2014, it was one of the first online galleries on the continent. And what I also observed at that time is that many galleries, art galleries, had quite poor websites that did not cater very well for audiences who wanted to kind of learn and explore the art world. And, you know, even as a consumer or viewer of art myself, I was finding it frustrating when I was visiting various different websites trying to find information. I could see that there were a lot of gaps in what people were doing. So my intention was to create an online platform that was easy to navigate, easy to gather information, and one which was also e-commerce enabled, so that if people wanted to buy an artwork online, they could do so easily. Now, I think historically the art world is a traditional world. It is resistant to change, or it has been resistant to change. And I think historically art galleries were very slow to move online, because I think the conventional view was that it was hard, if not impossible, to experience art in a digital way, art over the internet. You know, art is indeed a very tactile, art is tactile, it's subjective, it's often something that you do want to engage with in person, in the flesh, because that's where you will have the most powerful and dynamic interaction with the piece of art. But nonetheless, I maintain that the internet is a fantastic starting point to get to know an artist or some artworks. So even though the web is never going to solve entirely the problem of how to view art, it goes a long way. And I think what I've seen in the last few years is that now everyone in the art world is online. Art fairs during COVID, went online. People started doing all sorts of online interactive art events. And I think the view and attitude has really changed. People understand now that the internet can offer a lot. It is not a panacea. It does not solve every single problem, but it can go a long way to starting to raise awareness and to help international collectors from around the world, including in Asia, learn about African art. So I guess that is some of my experience. What I would say is that ultimately we need to have hybrid models. You know, we need to have a mix of online and offline, digital and physical. I think that's ultimately the best combination. So I think that is our future.
And just out of personal interest, NFT has been talked about all the time. I just really personally don't know what's happening in that space, but personally, what do you think about the NFT?
Yeah, there has been a huge amount happening in that space over the last 2 years, and I think there's been a lot of hype and excitement, some of which I think is justified. I do think that blockchain is going to change a lot about our future across all different industries. When it comes to NFTs, for me personally, I want to be able to enjoy the tactility of an artwork in non-digital form. That's just my personal preference. The reason that artists make art like they do is precisely because it exists as an object in the world, something to see, something to possibly touch, something to get a sensual experience with and from, an interaction, which for me just cannot happen via an NFT. That said, I do understand that there's a whole market for NFTs and NFT collectors and people who are passionate about these digital tokens. I do understand that, and I think this world is going to continue and grow. I think it will continue to do so in parallel to the physical real world art world. And it's going to be interesting to see how the worlds intersect. But I think it's still very early days for the NFT space. I think there's still a lot that is going to happen, and I think we need to take it step by step. And for collectors as well, I would say take your time to kind of learn, see where this world is going. And then, of course, I admit that there's, you know, my age and my generation is also part of my response. So, you know, by some people's standards, I'm already very old, and I understand that much younger people already are engaging with the digital world in a completely different way than I am, or probably that I ever will. And so I have to acknowledge that, you know, my experience of the world is increasingly becoming outdated. So I accept that that's also part of what's coming and what's happening already very quickly.
It will be very difficult to convince the Chinese audience that you are old. So, Julie, we all know that the internet has no boundary and we are a flat world nowadays. Do you have any experience engaging with the Asian market and specifically the Chinese market? Just curious.
We are just starting to do that and we're very excited about it. The year before last, we collaborated with a private foundation in China who have a very big art collection of international art, but also African art. And this foundation in turn collaborated with a museum in China where they exhibited for the first time a collection of African art. It was the first African art exhibition at a museum in China that I'm aware of. So this was something very exciting, something very new, and some of our artists were included in that presentation. Of course, the other way that we're starting to engage with Asian collectors is, of course, online. And Artsy is a popular platform where we are meeting collectors, for example, from South Korea, and we're starting to get inquiries and starting to have conversations with collectors in those markets, which is very exciting. So it's still early days, but we think that there's great potential for more and more engagement, and we're very much looking forward to that and to seeing, you know, what kind of tastes and aesthetics these collectors hold, which of course are going to be maybe unique or different from collectors in other parts of the world. And I mean, that's the beauty of art collecting, is that these different sorts of aesthetics develop partly in a communal kind of way, but also at a very individual level. So it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds in the case of China. And then I might also add that we're actually about to present our very first art fair in Hong Kong in March, between the 22nd and the 25th of March. It's called Art Central Hong Kong. We are really excited to be there. It's our first time showing in Hong Kong. It's our first time showing in Asia, and we think we're just going to meet a lot of amazing people and very interesting collectors and curators. So we are looking forward to that.
May I ask, what made you interested in going to an art fair in Hong Kong this year?
Well, you know, as a small business with an international facing presence, you know, we're always on the lookout for where we should be growing our engagement. We have spent quite a bit of the last few years participating in exhibitions and art fairs in Europe and the UK, and also the US. But of course, it's no secret that there is so much growth and economic activity in China. And again, I suppose there are going to be new appetites for sort of an increasing number of cultural engagements, including contemporary fine art. So for us, it is partly about engaging with these new collectors for the first time and seeing what the response is like. And of course, we're very happy to have found that we have Chinese collaborators here in South Africa as well, and that there are trade relations developing between the two countries.
Wonderful. And when you select artworks and artists to go to the Asian fair, what were you thinking, just out of curiosity?
So we will be presenting two artists, one of whom is from Namibia. Her name is Thuli Mekonjo, and she is actually a self-taught artist who is extremely accomplished and who has made waves internationally. So in terms of Thuli, you know, we really want to help her grow her international exposure and international reach, and she has already established herself, you know, as a highly respected artist. So she is an example of someone who has achieved a lot, and we want to, you know, put our best foot forward and share with Chinese and Asian audiences one of our top performing artists. The other artist, Bev Batko, is an artist who is very concerned with materiality and labor and gender, and she will be presenting an amazing installation which is all based around weaving. And so audiences will actually be able to move in between these very large-scale weaves, and with care will actually also be able to touch the weaves and have a very tactile experience at the fair. Bev is a South African artist. She's interesting because she only became a full-time artist in her 40s. She changed career entirely. She was trained as an accountant, and in her 40s she realized that creativity needed to be a central part of her life going forward. So she has undergone a huge amount of hard work and additional degrees and education later on in life, and we will be presenting her work in Hong Kong as well.
Well, so if you're looking for inspiration from Africa, this is a great art fair to go to, it seems. And you can find Dr. Julie Taylor at the Hong Kong Art Fair from the 22nd to the 25th of March in Hong Kong. So Julie, with the New Colors of Africa campaign, we'll meet some experienced collectors and also some first-time collectors. What advice would you give to Asian collectors, Chinese collectors about African art, how to pick, and maybe you may share a little bit about how you pick as a collector as well?
Those are great questions, thank you. So I think in terms of collecting, I always advise people to follow what they like, follow their heart, not to be too influenced by trends or what other people think is hot or popular, but to really follow their own instinct and to respond to something that speaks to them. Because after all, in most cases, they are going to be the person living with the artwork, and so it must be something that they feel that they can live with and which responds to them. Some people, of course, are interested in buying art as an investment, and I appreciate that that may be the case sometimes. Even if you are buying it as an investment, I would still say try to find something that you actually really like and can live with, because if you're going to have it in your space, then it must speak to you, not just for 5 minutes, but ideally for a few years. So I think that's a good place to start, and also to take time to learn, take time to do research on social media, do research on the web, speak to the gallerist who you are thinking about buying from. You can even have a conversation with the artist over social media or directly if you want to. Most artists will be working with the gallery, and the gallery is their professional representative. So it's best usually to make your purchase through a gallery, because the gallery has the experience of how to handle everything, including the shipping and logistics and insurance and things like that, which are important if you're going to be receiving your artwork from far away. But if you want to get to know the artist a little bit, then by all means, reach out to them as well. The gallery can also offer to set up a meeting with you and the artist. You might even be able to have a live video studio visit. Something like that can be really fun. So it depends how serious you are and how much time you want to spend. Of course, you can also just find something on the website that you like and you can buy it. And often you can buy it online with very little time spent or without any delays. But if you want to take time to build your collection slowly and you care about the artist you're investing in and the gallery that you're working with, then I would say just take some time to do your research and feel free to ask questions. I mean, really ask lots of questions. Take your time, have a conversation with the gallerist. That might be, whether it's over email or social media or maybe even a phone call or a video call. That's a great way just to kind of get to know who you are working with and learn more about the artist.
Thank you. 今天我非常有幸能和 Dr. Julie Taylor 聊一聊非洲艺术和非洲艺术的产业跟全球的互动。那我希望大家也跟我一样，非常开心的学到了很多新的知识。So thank you very much, Dr. Julie Taylor.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today and with your audiences, and we are very excited about our forthcoming trip to Hong Kong and of course to meeting many of the viewers here today online in whatever format.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'll see each other at the roundtable discussion later.